So I have one client that I worked with, and sometimes what people come to me for ends up being completely different to what the real challenge is and what they need to solve for. And so helping them think about things holistically when people, and this is Jim Rohn's quote, but helping people learn to work harder on themselves than they do on their job. So when we focus on ourselves and understand ourselves and our mental models and our thought patterns and our behaviors, what's helpful, what's not, and then start to make micro changes, often there's one change that will have the biggest impact for people. And if we can help people understand what that is, along with the alignment with their values, then we start to get momentum.
This season on It's Never About Money, we've been exploring health as a critical and often missing part of the money conversation. But what if the way we think about money, stress, and success is being shaped by forces inside us we barely understand? In this episode, I speak with Hannah Conkey, a multidisciplinary thinker with a background in finance, neuroscience, and architectural design, who helps people and organisations rewire how they function. What struck me most is how Hannah sees the brain as not just a black box, but as something we can redesign through environment, language, and self-awareness. We explore how our biology, senses, and physical spaces influence decision-making, relationships, and the way we work, often without our conscious input. And we dig into what happens when we ignore this, which is things like burnout, work addiction, and a kind of systemic overstimulation that disconnects us from ourselves. This conversation is about reclaiming ourselves and agency, and about understanding that clarity, energy, and resilience aren't just things we should have, they're things we can actually design for. And that matters deeply, especially when making choices about how we live, how we work, and how we spend. So obviously, the health aspect and theme is something that I've been really advocating for in this particular season. And I'm really pleased and privileged to have Hannah Conkey with me to actually discuss a little bit about how health and money intersect. But I thought we might start with a little bit about you, Hannah, because maybe just like you to sort of have a chat with the listeners around what brought you to sort of where you are today with the whole neuroscience, biology, executive coaching sort of world.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here today. Obviously, it's an area I'm very passionate about. I guess my background is banking and finance, and I always had an interest in psychology, human behavior, and went on to study that. And working in a banking and finance role, the first couple of years I spent as a banker gave me a really good insight to just how similar the process is around, having conversations with clients, understanding their goals, their needs, their purpose, what it is that they're trying to achieve, and some of the challenges that they're trying to solve for. And I guess there was very, very much a similarity with the types of conversations I'd have with clients from a psychology perspective. And so throughout my career, I was always quite into health and fitness and very much loved learning. And I guess I'd moved from a banking role into a learning and development role. And in that time, I had some really great experiences with getting to understand people and what was important to them with their career and the different types of challenges that they had, and recognize that most things can be overcome through learning. So it's generally either a information, knowledge, or capability gap. I spent a lot of time working in organizations, particularly around change and transformation. So looking at business behavior, human behavior, and, what some of the things are that help an organization and people work well and perform at their best and feel great, but also some of the challenges. And so I co-founded a health and wellbeing business, so with a particular focus on metabolic health, personal training, boot camps, because I could see a lot of executives were really focusing in on working but not looking after themselves, and then would end up burnt out and not as effective as they could be, and that would have a direct impact on their teams, and the organizational performance, and obviously their personal life as well. So from understanding all of that, I've always had an interest in the brain and wanting to take a little bit of a deeper dive into more just the way we behave, but actually what the science is behind that, and this link between our brains, our bodies, and everything that we experience through our five senses, what we eat and how that impacts the way that we think, the way that we feel and the way that we behave, and the opportunities to then be quite strategic about that and intentional with what we expose ourselves to and how we show up so that we can think, feel and be our best.
So is it curiosity that moved you towards this sort of role? Curiosity, obviously, around the sort of biological aspects and the neuroscience, but then also your background in business. Is it curiosity, or is it more that there was a specific challenge that you felt, or a gap there that actually wasn't being filled? Is there something specific there that was like annoying you, that made you want to go into something quite unique, actually?
It might be a bit of a combination. I think, a lot of the work that I did was leadership development and working with others. And so I think I learned a lot from that. And I really wanted to help people, achieve their potential and be the best that they could be. I think underlying everything is people want to be successful. People want to do well. And I think have really good intentions and sometimes just don't have the skills or support or resources to be able to do that. And then obviously the opportunities in business as well. I think for me personally, I had, I've worked in lots of organizations and I've loved working in the business side of it. But I think when, it doesn't matter how hard people work, if they're not looking after themselves or they're not investing in themselves, they can't perform well. They don't sleep well, they don't eat well, they don't show up their best. For me, I had gone through long career of investing in other people and decided at some point maybe it's an opportunity to do some self-reflection and actually, start to think about, well, how do I, as a leader, both personally and professionally, show up? What am I doing? What are my habits? What's the impact that I'm having on others? Mm-hmm. And so I guess probably for the first time, maybe not the first time, but really decided to dive into it and, use myself as a little bit of a guinea pig to see if I could make particular changes in my life and see what the impact of that was. Then hopefully I could also, link the science to it and then share that with other people, because the changes that I was able to make had such a big impact, not just for me, but for everybody around me, that I wanted to be able to share that more broadly and see other people do the same.
Would you be open to sharing with us what the challenges were that you identified in your own personal life, and then what you did to change, and then how it impacted your professional and your personal life?
Yeah, sure. In my early 20s, I had quite a significant car accident, and that had, it had a really long-term impact for me. Some of the benefits of that were I realized I wasn't invincible, which I thought I was before that, but also really valuing some of the little things that I'd perhaps taken for granted before. And I also developed some really strong relationships from that. Part of that then led into co-founding this health and wellbeing and fitness business, because it was something I was really passionate about. And I also knew that it wasn't just a hobby or something that we do for fun. It has quite profound, cognitive, emotional and social benefits as well, and linked to our overall wellbeing. I guess from there, I'd always wanted to connect and create a holistic business that focused on, the mind, body and business connection, and obviously linking the neuroscience so that people could understand not just what they were doing, but why they were doing it. A couple of years ago, to answer your question, so I guess there was that earlier piece for me. And then I have a 17-year-old son, and, wanting to be a really good role model and support him. But part of, prior to launching this business, after COVID, I had the COVID vaccination, mm-hmm. and I'd had, some issues with my heart throughout my life that I was obviously born with, mm-hmm. and that made it a lot worse. And so I spent probably 12 to 18 months really dealing with this really significant challenge for me, and I'd be awake all night and I'd be at hospital quite a lot, and I ended up having to have heart surgery. So I'd had a relationship breakdown, and then I had heart surgery, and my mum passed away a couple of weeks later. So I guess looking at all of that, I had a lot of time to even though it was difficult, I had a lot of time to think about it and really focusing on what I was grateful for, the fact that, I could be there for my son and I could still choose how I wanted to show up to the world and the impact that I wanted to have. And I think it helped me become acutely aware of when I was around people, I could be really intentional about what I was thinking, what I was feeling, the words that I choose to use, and how I could connect with people and hold space for them and listen to them. And, I think most of the time people don't really listen to us. They might ask how you are or have conversations, but we've got so much going on that we don't necessarily hold space for people to truly listen and to support them, to help them achieve their goals or to work through what it is.
Yep.
So, yeah, I think that for me really led to some significant change and change in my personal life as well, where, started making better decisions for myself about wanting to do some more study and wanting to do this so that I could actually help other people as well.
Thinking about your story, I think about, where there sometimes in individuals, are there patterns that end up showing up in the way that we are, like that our health changes as a result of the patterns, or we have these one-off events that occur that we had no control over that impacts our health, which actually changes our patterns going forward. Which one is it? Could it be both?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of both. So
Yep.
we all, grow up differently and have different experiences, different values, different beliefs, different mental models based on all of those things. And we grow up, learning to predict patterns in behavior or, the way things play out. And so everything that we do is a process. So the way that we think, we have particular processes around decision making. We have processes around how we do stress or do anger or, whatever it might be, catastrophizing. Yeah. So they're all a process. And so it's not dissimilar to brushing your teeth. So, everyone has their own process. And so what I would say is don't believe everything that you think, because we, over time we learn these processes and we just follow them.
Yep.
And often it's not until people experience a significant event, usually, not a great one, that really leads to transformational change.
Yep.
So I think that's often a key trigger, and usually it's usually not the great things that happen. Usually it's when things happen that, negatively impact our life that lead to really positive outcomes. When things are going well for us, often we don't feel the need to change. There's no burning platform, so we just keep doing what we're doing. But most of us at some point in our life have something significant enough that, makes us redirect what we're doing and where we're heading.
And to take your example of the toothbrush, I talk about myself, like there's a correct way to clean your teeth and there's an incorrect way to clean your teeth. And so you might be actually cleaning your teeth in a way that is, unbeknownst to you, you think that it's absolutely fine. 2-3 years down the track, you go and have another, checkup with your dentist, and all of a sudden they're saying to you, well, you're not cleaning at this particular area and it's a problem and this has happened and this has happened, right? So there must be many different things that we don't check up for regularly that are a behavioral pattern that is setting us up for failure, which we have no awareness about. And I would say that we're not robots, right? We are in a system at the moment whereby in some ways, when we work, in the way that we work, it's quite uniform and it's established in a way that deals and caters for the majority, but not necessarily for every individual. So I wonder how that works, how we can tie that sort of conversation in.
So I see that happen a lot, particularly with the people that I work with and just conversations that I have. And everybody has the capacity to learn new processes and do things differently. But often, again, we don't know that we either need to, or there's no burning platform, or we don't think there's anything wrong with the processes that we're currently running. And often people don't realize that they're running a process. It's, I think this, I feel this, therefore I do this. So our thoughts, trigger our feelings, which influences our behavior. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to get into neuroscience was actually understanding what was really happening. And so I like, some of the NLP processes because it really starts to break down the
That's
key
neuro-linguistic programming, yeah?
programming. Yes.
Yep.
So it really starts to break down the key processes, common processes that we run. And so when people start to identify, oh, how do I do this? It's not I have anxiety. It's, I'm doing this, or we start recognizing our thoughts and the pattern. So when X happens, I do Y. And then when X happens again, I do Y. And then X happens, I do Y. And then at some point, when people start to reprogram and reframe what's happening and develop these new processes, it's almost like, insert for AI, create a new process. When this happens, do this. People are then able to run a completely different process, which changes how they think, how they feel, the outcomes that they get, and how they feel about themselves, but also how they impact and show up for everybody else around them. And that for me is incredibly empowering, because it means that, often people feel stuck and they feel like they know that they could achieve more and they want to achieve more, do more, do things differently, but they don't have the internal resources, or don't know that they have the internal resources to do things differently, to get a different outcome. So helping people learn and understand this means that they become empowered to be able to, make better decisions, to, have more meaningful relationships and have greater quality of life and get better outcomes along the way. And to do that with intention.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You talk about how our biology and the five senses that we have shape the way we think, feel, even the way we spend. How does this show up in your work?
So if you, at a really simplistic level, when you think about everything that we see, taste, touch, smell, hear, has a direct influence on our brain chemistry and our biology. So it's all connected as part of one system. So if, you said, how does this connect with money? I mean, obviously it connects with everything, but particularly around money, the environment that we're in. So when it's, if it's super noisy or there's lots of things happening, it impacts our decision making. So one of the things that I see a lot for people, particularly executives or people in a corporate or any work environment, is we're running from one thing to the next. And so you're thinking about what you just came from, you're thinking about the next thing that you're going to, and then you're checking your phone and your emails, and then there's all these things coming at us. When we've got so much information coming in, it makes it very hard to make, to create the clarity and the space to make better decisions. So a really simple example would be, often if you see a parent with their kids and the kid keeps nagging at them and they're trying to have they want a lolly or whatever it might be, and the kid keeps nagging at them and the parent's trying to have a conversation with somebody else, and they might say no, 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 and eventually they give in. So when we look at the five senses, so what we can see impacts how we think and how we feel. So being outside, having access to lots of natural daylight, the daylight and darkness impacts our hormones and our sleep cycle, our circadian rhythms. What we see in terms of, when we think about money, neuroscientists, behavioral economists, so psychology, neuroscience, NLP, people use these strategies very intentionally around the way that we buy, to tap into, what we see, our visual cues, our sensory cues, our emotions. So if you walk into a place, like if you're selling a house, for example, if you walk into a place and they're baking bread or nice food, or same thing when you go into the supermarket, if you can smell, you might not be hungry, but then you get that cue, and then, you like, oh, now I feel like something that smells great. I might go and buy something from the bakery, even though you didn't actually want anything. So everything in our environment shapes the way that we think, it shapes the way that we feel, and it shapes the way that we behave. The food that we eat is another example. So how the brain and body process, how we store and metabolize foods and the different types, so proteins, fats, carbohydrates, etc., that has a direct impact on decision making. So a lot of the research suggests that if you're if you're going to make a big decision, don't eat a high carbohydrate or sugar diet. It impacts your mood,
Mm,
your
mm,
feelings around social
mm,
relationships,
mm,
and decision making. So
mm,
instead, leaning more towards healthy fats and proteins because of
mm,
how we metabolize that.
mm.
So they all play a really key role. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I'm just trying to kind of think about it globally. Like, really, what we're trying to do here is to improve people's life satisfaction, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And life satisfaction includes their vocation, their work, all that sort of stuff, right? And part of the mix, in order to be able to get to a point of making good decisions improve life satisfaction, right? So
Absolutely.
good decision making. And so where does good decision making come from? It comes from having a good cognitive health, right? And where does good
Yes.
cognitive health come from? Comes from a starting point of good physical health as well.
Hmm. Yes.
Would that be the order in the way that you see things, or do you see that you need to actually attack all of these things in a multidisciplinary way?
It's all connected.
Yeah.
So I think, and most people have experienced this, where perhaps they really focus in on, I'm going to fix my diet, but then they're not exercising, or I'm going to focus in on my work and learn more, but then they're not, maybe they're drinking a lot of alcohol or coffee, or they're not hydrated, or the environment that they're in is not conducive to what they're trying to achieve. So to get the best results, I like to encourage people to try and tackle it holistically, because what your the cognitive function, everything that's happening in our brain has a direct impact on our body. So our brain sends signals to the rest of our body based on what we're thinking and feeling and what we're kind of telling ourselves. So helping people learn new processes to rewire their brain and their thought patterns and their mental models will have a direct impact on their physical health. And the same thing, if you want to think better and feel better, like internally, go for a walk, do some exercise, because
Mm,
it releases, positive chemicals for us that enable us to then move differently, to show up differently, and to feel better. And then if you are eating well as well and surrounding yourself with positive people. So again, coming back to the environment piece, the environment's not just the built environment, it's everything that we see. So walking down the street, it's what we watch on the news or on TV or social media. It's the people we spend time with, that all of that shapes the way that we think and the way that we feel.
W-
So
Would I be adding my own bias in here by saying that for me personally, it seems intuitive that working on the cognitive thought processes seems to be a much harder task than dealing with the controllables around light exposure, sleep, for me anyway, food, things of exercise, things of that nature. So that's why I'm kind of thinking in order of priority, the low hanging fruit seems to be on the physical side to give you the ability to be able to deal with that cognitive, changing thought patterns and stuff, which is, I find, incredibly difficult.
I think it absolutely helps, because when you're moving, when you're eating better, you've got more energy, you're probably going to sleep better.
Yeah.
Again, the way that your body's processing everything is better. So
Mm,
absolutely, diet and exercise play a really key role in your overall mental and emotional health as well. I think the piece around, dealing with the cognitive piece is, again, sometimes if we can make it really simple for people and break it down into, small bite-sized changes that people can make, it becomes accessible. And when it's accessible, it becomes doable. So, I think when I'm running programs or working with people, really trying to get them to focus on one or two things, don't focus on everything. But if you can start making some key changes. So part of changing your thought patterns will help the way that you move. It will help the way that you eat. It will help the way that you
mm,
self-regulate, and the way that you show up for other people.
mm. That makes sense. So, do you have examples of people that you've worked with where just starting as a starting point, having a better understanding of their biology and having a better understanding of their thoughts actually unlocked the ability for them to make significant change and how that impacted them?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons I love coaching is like, so I do a lot of work around narrative coaching and executive coaching, and also the NLP coaching. What I like with your narrative coaching and executive coaching is you're not necessarily making recommendations to people. You're not telling them what to do, but you're listening and you're understanding their values, their motivations, their thought processes, their patterns, their, the internal framework around what they're telling themselves about particular situations or circumstances or events or, current, past, or future. And so as you start to understand that, it creates opportunities and awareness for individuals to then go, oh, I didn't realize that I thought that, or I was thinking that, or, they start tapping into internal resources that they didn't know they had access to think differently and to solve for things in a different way. And so you're able to work with them to actually get different outcomes and, again, coming back to helping them feel empowered. A lot of the time, I'll still, following on from there, give them simple strategies around, depending on what it is, to address whether it's, at a cognitive level or physical or might be something completely unrelated to what we've just talked about. But giving them simple strategies that they can use makes a big difference. So I have one client that I worked with, and sometimes what people come to me for ends up being completely different to what the real challenge is and what they need to solve for. And so helping them think about things holistically, when people, and this is Jim Rohn's quote, but, helping people learn to work harder on themselves than they do on their job. So when we focus on ourselves and understand ourselves and our mental models and our thought patterns and our behaviors, what's helpful, what's not, and then start to make micro changes. Often there's one change that will have the biggest impact for people. And if we can help people understand what that is, along with the alignment with their values, then we start to get momentum.
Yeah, and it seems like there might be a bit of a psychological relief in the knowledge where you can determine why you might be having challenges at work that are related to something possibly relating to your biological hardware. It's like your computer is set at in this particular way, and that's why you're having challenges in this particular area, because you keep moving in a certain way that's not actually in line with your biology. There might be a bit of relief associated with that, rather than thinking to yourself, oh, I just can't do this because I choose not to, or I'm lazy, or I'm this, or I'm that. So is that also true of the kind of experience of learning more about your actual, the way I think about it is your computer?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all sort of wired for avoiding bad things happening and seeking good things. Our level of, motivation is generally high for avoiding bad things from happening. So David Rock talks about the SCARF model, which is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So when you think about decisions that we're making, particularly when it comes to money or anything else, the decisions that we're making generally align to one of those. So am I making this decision because it'll lead to creating certainty for me, or I'm seeking greater autonomy, therefore I'm going to make this decision, or because I want, because of how our brain registers, social relationships and connection and belonging, then in order for me to feel like I'm part of this group, my identity and social connection and being part of the tribe, I make this decision. And the same thing when it comes to spending money. Often people will make buying decisions based on that. So it's not the money itself, it's what the money allows people to do and how it helps. Obviously there's a component around dopamine and reward, and things like being hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, and stressed can influence the way that we spend and the decisions that we make. And that's not just for money, that's for eating or, anything that we do. And so again, even just little things like that, where if people are going to make decisions, stopping and asking themselves, well, am I making this decision because I'm bored or I'm lonely or, I'm tired? Because we don't make our best decisions when we're in that state. So being able to check back in and go, okay, I value X, Y, and Z, therefore helping people align the choices that they make and their behaviors to their values.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I was just thinking as well that for me, one of the reasons I didn't realize it was probably a subconscious choice to run this podcast is that obviously I want to learn myself. And the interesting thing about the way that I learn is that I tend to paraphrase what the person has said because I'm a verbal processor. And so even when I think about presenting to a client some new content that I haven't presented before, it's important for me to actually practice that out loud for it to stick. And so, for many years I didn't know that about myself. And so once I did know that, things like the podcast have actually helped me learn an amazing amount just by the very nature of having to kind of think about what you've said and actually repeat it in the way that I think about it. So there's an example of kind of having an inkling and an awareness of the style of processor that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's some, like, we have our circadian rhythms, which is the 24-hour, biological rhythms.
Yeah.
Within that, and this comes back to work and how we learn as well. So you've got these kind of 90-minute time peak periods throughout the day where we feel most energetic and can do our best work, and then following that with a break. And then the same thing comes to studying and learning, neuroplasticity. So I mentioned before, I've got a 17-year-old son, so I'm obviously a super nerd, and I'm not sure he shares my passion. However, working with him around not, he's great in terms of doing his homework and all the work that he does, but actually the learning process itself and being able to create, these, it's called the Pomodoro technique, but creating these shorter study sessions where you're giving your brain, you do study, test, test, test. And so you're giving your brain the opportunity to get the information to test yourself. And part of what you're talking about where you're replaying it back is that. And so it really helps people, if you're uninterrupted, to strengthen the neural connections and remember that information as part of the learning process. So it makes a big difference.
One of the things that I suggested to you at the start of this recording was there is a system out there, and it tends to, in the way that we work, the way that we show up to work, and the way that organizations create their processes around the majority. The issue is that those that are, of course, that are captured in the majority, they tend to be relatively fine. There's no friction there. But there are those that actually sit in the minority, which can be a substantial sum, mind you, of people that have a different type of wiring. And I think about, the more sort of usual types like ADHD, which has become reasonably common. We hear about it quite a bit now, and also autism and the different wiring that exists for people that exhibit those behavioral traits. How difficult is it for those who perhaps don't have agency over the way they work to show up in a productive way?
So the stats show that there's a significant impact on cognitive function, productivity, performance, well-being when people are in an environment. So let's take a workplace. When they're in an environment that's noisy, that doesn't have good airflow, that doesn't have a lot of natural lighting, that doesn't have, different types of spaces for people to move around, to connect, to collaborate, to do focus work, to do creative work. So there is a lot of data around the impact that that's having both for the individual and the organisation. And I know I've seen a lot of people sharing their frustration and the challenges that they've individually been experiencing, particularly post-COVID, coming back in and trying to adapt to being in the office. I think it's twofold. I think, as an individual, what are the things that I can do? What's within my control? What do I need? And then as an organisation, how do we strategically and intentionally design both the built environment, and that can be both for the individual at home and also for the workplace. And then how do we design workflows? Because people, and I think this is also where neurotech's quite cool, because a lot of the, the insights and trends and what we're starting to see in that space is really interesting. But we can make really simple changes in a workplace around collaborative spaces, the impact that, natural lighting has, that plants have on the way that we feel, on our mood, the different spaces that we work in. So not every organization is going to want to redesign their office, but there are really simple things that we can do. Changing the blue lights, all of those things have an impact. Can we create, quiet spaces for people that do want to do focused work? Because if we look at the natural rhythms that we have as individuals throughout the day, it's not necessarily aligned. So the more autonomy people have with, recognizing when they're at their peak, when they need a break, and then using those peak focus periods, and then where they're like, okay, now I'm having a bit of an energy slump, go for a walk around the block, do some collaborating, have a walking meeting, the opportunity to mix it up and do things differently. And it will be slightly different for each individual, but creating an environment where, we've got some of those really natural focus areas for people, and enough daylight and greenery, and also areas where people can just go and do focus work and have spaces for collaboration and all the rest of it, I think will make a big difference. So if I have some control and autonomy over that in my workplace, then you're going to get a much better outcome and output from me, and I'm going to think better and feel better and more likely to show up to work. I've got some of the partners that we work with who design workplaces, and the stats around, they've done some office renovations and refurbs and built new office spaces, and the stats that they've been able to collate around engagement, productivity, health and well-being, and people actually being in the office because it's a positive place to be is quite remarkable.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it sounds like it's a collaboration between the awareness of the employer and the employee. So,
Yes.
perhaps the employer planting the seeds with the employees around, we talk about ways of working in terms of the way that we communicate with each other, but to take it further, like, what thinking about the nature of the energy levels of the individuals, and what actually impacts high energy and low energy throughout the day, and so on and so forth. Getting them to sort of think, employees to think about that, and then actually creating workspaces and potentially workflows and appropriate projects at appropriate times could be quite an impactful pursuit when it comes to productivity.
Absolutely. I think it's a game changer. And again, I think that partnership, it's the individual understanding what role does food and nutrition have, and sleep, and, being able to recognize what their needs are and how to design their work, and also minimize distractions. So if I need to do focused tasks type work, then being able to do that and remove the distractions, and the same for other types of work, and as well for the organization. I think with some of the advancements with neurotech, where there will be, well, there already are, but where, we've got access to wearables, to EEG, to, sensory, like eye tracking, to see where people have peak periods of energy and a more in a readiness to do innovative work versus task focused work. So also things like adjusting the lighting and direct stimulation to the brain for different parts of the brain to both increase activity in certain parts and then decrease it in others. So you're sort of stimulating different parts of the brain to improve cognitive function, performance, emotional well-being, mental health, etc. as well. So I think that'll be a really interesting space to watch also.
Is it often the case that, catering for a person with neurodiverse wiring, the initiatives that you might put in place for those individuals may actually still be adaptive and helpful for those individuals who don't have that wiring?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So is there
And
like some low-hanging fruit there, Hannah?
So I think maybe part of coming back to before, and it probably sounds easier than it is, and I've worked in some large organizations and I know it's not often that easy, but where I've seen it work well is organizations that have, different spaces for different types of work, and having an understanding around the impact of work design on individuals. So having conversations with your employees to understand what are the key types of needs or requirements that they have, and recognizing that we are all different. Our brains are different, our needs are different, but still being able to create really simple solutions. So things like so some of the things I mentioned before, but replacing the blue lights, because that impacts our brain and our physical health and all the rest of it. A little bit more greenery, having some quiet areas. So if you're sitting in this part, you can sit there with your AirPods in and do your focus work and do what you need to do, but then trying to encourage people not to stay there all day and to move to other spaces as they do different types of work, and having a little bit more autonomy about how they design their day. I think one of the challenges that we have is not just an individual and their needs. I think it's the fact that there's a lot of external factors that are influencing the way that we think and feel. And a lot of the time we're so busy or interrupted that we are not able or don't have the time or space to actually stop and think, okay, how am I thinking right now? What's my energy like? What's my, how am I holding things in my body? Yeah. What do I need? What can I do? Maybe I need to go for a walk, or I need to do something differently. So the architect that works with us, Chris, we talk about kind of going through the portal, and it's changing the physical and mental state. So by getting up, and so you might be bored or not feeling productive or overstimulated or whatever it is, but actually by getting up and moving, to your point before, you can use your physical, your physiology to actually make cognitive changes. So getting up and going for a walk, going into another room, being in a different environment, going outside, can all make a big change. So just, if you can create a few different spaces for different types of work around the office, that makes a big difference.
That's really interesting, because it sounds like putting in circuit breakers, reminders of the fact that you're human is important. And I say that, I say that quite honestly and genuinely. I think sometimes we forget that we are actually quite human, and we have some very human needs that aren't addressed during the day. And I talk about this because I think one of the things that gets very much left and not seen as being a negative is this sort of idea of overwork and work addiction. It's sort of, to have a productive economy, we want to be working and being successful. It, financially helps us, all these types of things. But a lot of people's lives are kind of caught in this sort of addiction cycle of spending way too much time at work and not actually smelling the roses. And I think you coined it something like systemic ADHD. How does the environment that we've created affect that or produce that sort of outcome?
Yeah. So I look at it from both lenses, and I have a bit of a philosophy which is human first, not hustle first. Yeah. And I see, particularly working with a lot of executives, and most people fall into this, like the work addiction is a real thing, but it comes back to why, what need is it fulfilling for us? So I'll start with the individual and then come to the organization, if that's okay. So when we're in any environment, we can't necessarily control the environment. What we can do, though, is control ourselves. And so really simple practices like, and again, probably comes back a little bit to the portal, theory, or the circuit breakers, which is, before, I'm trying to encourage people, before you get out of bed in the morning, just stop, think about your day, think about yourself. How are you thinking? How are you feeling? What's on your mind? What are you concerned about? And, write it down. Make sure that you've got that so it's out of your head, and then focus on your body, go within. And so start becoming aware of your breathing, slow your breathing down a bit. Think we're rushing, and we think we're doing a great job, but I don't know if you remember watching Roadrunner, but it's a little bit, and we've all worked with people that come in at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and you can feel their energy. So if people can start to, self-regulate just by gentle awareness, some breathing, and just, okay, how do I want to show up today? What's the impact that I want to have on everybody else around me? Because when I change, everyone and everything around me will change. So I can be really intentional about that. I can change my tone of voice. I can change the way that I move physically, and people will respond to me because of mirror neurons and obviously the social connection and all the rest of it. And the same thing for advisors with clients. They might come in and they've got lots of things on their mind and need to make important financial decisions. Your ability to take 5 minutes before they arrive and just focus on some breathing, calm your nervous system down so that you can then be better for others. Don't necessarily, if someone's racing, don't match theirs. Try, see if you can just slow your breathing down and get them to that stage. And sometimes I invite people just, okay, before we kick off, let's just take a few deep breaths together. And so I think back to when people would smoke or drinking, they're taking the deep breath in and the long deep breath out, and it's so it's sort of that process that we're going through. So there's definitely some things we can do as individuals regardless of what's going on around us, and it's even more important because it means then we can choose not to let those things come in and affect us. What is going on within us is also going to affect everybody around us and the environment. So from a work context, I think again, trying to create an environment that is more conducive to the way our brains work and the way our bodies naturally function, and aligning to our rhythms, and having, not having blue light and not having, days where people just work through the whole day and don't have a break. We're actually more effective when we take the breaks. And again, it aligns to those ultradian rhythms. So we're actually more effective. So slow down and be present. And when we're present, we make better decisions. We have a better impact. Other people then make better decisions and they feel better. So for me, it sort of starts with us. And then, for organizations, trying to be aware of this and create environments and enable people to do that too.
I'm definitely thinking in solution mode now. So
Tell me.
I feel like obviously it's very clear from listening to this conversation that there's a challenge, and the challenge, if it isn't addressed, ends up making its way into poor decision making and potentially suboptimal life satisfaction. So I think there's a fair bit on the line. So, if someone is feeling sort of stuck financially, emotionally, physically with their decision making, what's one step that they can take towards moving forward?
So one thing for me would be ask yourself, what's the biggest thing, or what's the one thing, if you change that one thing right now, that would have the biggest impact in your life? Because for most people, there's one thing that, links to everything else. And whether it's mindset, whether it's not exercising, whether they need to improve their diet, maybe, less alcohol, or change relationships with people, or change their job, or change the environment. Usually there's one thing that is having a flow-on effect to everything else. So I think identifying that then can start to reprogram and make changes.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously you work with organizations and individuals. I imagine that's part of what you do to help them with their workspaces, but also their broader lives from an executive coaching point of view.
Yes.
Yeah. So what resources are available for those who might either want it, from everything from reading books to, actually making appointments to catching up with executive coaches? What should people do if they like what we're talking about but don't know where to start?
There's some really good podcasts. So obviously, I think from a mindset perspective, so again, what we're filling our mind with will have a direct impact on what we think and how we feel. So if you don't have great people around you to have conversations with or to fill your mind with, start listening to really great podcasts and speakers and people that you can learn from and connect with that can offer some really great insights. So I like Andrew Huberman, obviously, because he's from a neuroscience perspective, and I think he makes it really accessible. And I love what he does. His podcasts are long, but I know that he's also created some much shorter ones as well for people to be able to get through them a bit faster. get it. There's also some free resources around neuroscience through Harvard and some of the other universities. So you can do some short online courses that are quite interesting. I think the more we start to understand our brains and our biology, we make better decisions because there's not something wrong with me, or there's not a problem. It's just this is happening because of that. And so if I change this, I'm going to get a different outcome. We offer a range of different programs, obviously, because a lot of free programs, and then other workshops, because we want people to, feel like they can get access to information and capability uplift to actually develop the resources and strategies to help them be more effective.
So we're not financially connected in any way, so you can give it
No?
a plug.
Okay, thank you. I think who else? I like... there's heaps of different podcasts that are good to listen to. I think Diary of a CEO, again, getting where you can get access and exposure to different people. The one thing that I would say is when people are listening, there's a difference between consuming information and content and actually doing something with it.
Yep.
And often that's where I see a gap, is that people, we're learning, we're consuming, but we're not making any changes.
Yep.
And so I think one of the reasons I love neuroscience and NLP is, sometimes when people go and they speak with a psychologist, they do a lot of talking. I love NLP because it's about rewiring and redesigning processes.
So when you talk about NLP, are you talking about someone taking you through a process?
Yes.
Potentially. So because I was going to say, for me, I'm a consumer of information, and you end up getting a fair awareness, but again, taking action is what you need to be doing. And I'm sure, subconsciously I am taking action in bits and pieces, but nothing beats someone holding you to account around things that you want to get done, that are important, but maybe not urgent or seemingly urgent.
Yeah, and that's where I think, having a coach or having somebody that can work with you around what are your holistic goals, what is it that you're trying to achieve, and then really break it down into, okay, well, this is what it looks like at a micro level. Because, if I want to change jobs, or I want to buy a house, or I want to do something that seems big and challenging, often people then experience overwhelm and just like, no, it's too hard. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to do what I was doing before. I think when, having the benefit of working with a coach or a practitioner that can help you, understand yourself, understand some of your helpful and unhelpful resources and states, and break down your goals into micro levels so that each day you're not trying to do 100 things, but you can do really little simple things that are achievable that, very quickly. And I think as we get older, time seems to go really fast. But, a day very quickly turns into 2 days, into 3 days, into a week, into a month, into 6 months, into 12 months. And if we do these small micro things consistently, we get the big results.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's such a shame that we have to sort of wind down now, because this sort of conversation I could probably have for 3 hours. I might exhaust you, but it's really interesting to me. And I think there's so many things that we can do physically, from a physical perspective, from the environment perspective, from a cognitive perspective, that I've learned in just in having a conversation to you. And I think it really reminds me that it is absolutely possible to build your own little mini ecosystem, or little subsystem, as I like to call it, within a broader system. Changing your environment in such a way to align with the way that you are. If you have agency as a business owner, that is certainly the case. But even as an employee, there is benefit in collaborating with your employer and talking to them about how this might actually improve not only the life satisfaction, but the productivity of those that are working in an organization. So I think it's benefits for all. But I'll just end with a question that I think you might appreciate, given the story that you told us earlier on. And I hope, again, that like all of our guests, that you have so many more years of great health. But if you only had one more year of good health, how would you actually use that time?
Great question. Funnily enough, I've actually thought about this.
Thought you might have.
Yeah, yes. And Yeah, I mean, in all honesty, when you start thinking like that, and I obviously spent quite a bit of time thinking in that way, and I would, which is what I have done over the last couple of years, which is, be present wherever you are, be there, because you won't get that moment again, you won't get that interaction again, and whoever whoever's important to you, being able to be present, be grateful for whatever it is. I think we get what we look for. And so looking for, as small as it might be, when we start looking for all these positive things, and you do see them when you're looking for that, it might just be the way somebody smiled at you walking down the street, or, the way they made your coffee was just amazing. That start, looking for gratitude and looking for all the positive things that are happening. That also rewires your brain and the way that you feel. And just taking a step back and thinking, why am I here? What am I actually trying to do with my life? What's really important to me? And how do I want to, at the end of the day, I think we think that we care about what other people think about us, but we don't. We care about how we think and feel about ourselves. And when we go to sleep at night, or, when it comes to the end of our time, we're going to be reflecting on ourselves and what we've done and how we feel about that. And so I think at the end of the day, don't worry so much about everybody else and what everyone else thinks about you. Work out what your values are, work out what's important to you in your life, and, try and be the best version of yourself that you can be, knowing that you're capable of achieving much more. And so, for me, going through all of that was, I really wanted to have a positive impact for everybody around me. I wanted to feel good about the decisions that I was making, but also, to share some of those experiences and the value and the learnings that I got, in the hope that I could help make somebody else's life better as well.
No, that's awesome. And what's a bit, for me, a bit profound is the idea that in some ways, yes, of course it matters what you do in that last year, but it's really about how you think about what you do in that last year that actually matters more. The actual gratitude aspect and the looking for positives is actually what is going to bring about the well-being and the sort of satisfaction, more so than necessarily thinking about, I want to tick off all of these bucket list items, which I know that, I think the guy's name's Arthur Brooks, that talks about the reverse bucket list, which I quite like, the idea of actually removing things rather than putting more things on. So I really like the way you answered that question. And from all of us here at It's Never About Money, and that includes obviously the community of listeners, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm looking forward to some social media activity and chatting post the release of this podcast, hopefully soon.
Thank you, Joe. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all the amazing work that you're doing for us and obviously the broader community. It's been really great to be here today. So thanks. And for everyone for listening.
Appreciate it.
If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.